right, I've got some cards I want to talk about from the next set so far, from what we've seen spoiled, as well as some games for you. So right now, I'm trying to look ahead at the next set and kind of get the deck prepared for incorporating some of the cards that are going to be coming out. So far, of what we know, at least from the cards that I think are almost certainly or will certainly be played, at the very least tested. And then on top of that, I'm looking at trying to figure out where I'm going to make the cuts. So as far as the deck right now goes, what I've done is I cut out a lot of the cards that I felt were the most likely to be cut, and I put in placeholder cards. So I put in placeholder cards that kind of have something to do with the cards that are being added, but not that much, but where I could. So for example, I have Is It Signet here, and I'll talk about that in a moment. There's a Mystic Confluence in here. There's a Mental Misstep in here. And currently I do not have Vandal Blast. And I took out Kaya a while back. I took out the Notion Thief, but I did leave in Cephalid Colosseum simply because Narset's staying. And the ability to occasionally just steal a game with that very simple combo is something that I'm not going to be taking out of the deck. I don't anticipate at any point. I think Narset's here to stay. That card's crazy. Best impulse ever, you could say. Anyway, so these are the cuts that I'm looking at for now. And then in addition to these, there may be a few others. So let's talk about what's going to come in, and then we'll move into the gameplay. I think I should discuss first what I'm looking at. So first of all, a card that absolutely has to be tested, probably will make the cut. It's highly likely this card's just not going to come out of this deck ever. We'll take a look at it. Urza, Lord High Artificer. A 4-drop, same casting cost as Jace. It's a human, which means Cavern of Souls gets to advantage it, of course, making it uncounterable against blue. But because we can name human, just like we normally do with all the rest of our Cavern of Souls plays. And so when it comes into play, it actually has the effect of creating a Karn's ultimate. So the -2 on Karn, Scion of Urza, is to make a 0/0 whose power and toughness are equal to the number of artifacts you control, and it itself is an artifact, so it's at least a 1/1. This thing enters play and gives you a free one um, of those. And then it also has the ability to tap an untapped artifact you control to add blue. So the thing that you just got, you can then tap for blue mana. Um, and so this comes at a discount. It's almost like this costs 3 manas if you can find a way to spend the mana on that turn. So for example, if this thing truly costs 3, of course it would come down a turn earlier, but 4 with a rebate is the next best thing, right? However, if you have Breya tokens laying around or Breya itself, this thing can cost 0. So you play Breya and you have 3 artifact creatures, and on the next turn you cast Urza, have not played a land at all. You have the same 4 mana you had before. You play Urza, you get a construct, and you can now tap the construct, Breya, and the 2 flyers for 4 blue mana, which is crazy, right? Um, and then finally, it's also got a fat butt as a 1/4. It's solid, so it's not going to be bolted. It is killable by Breya, though, if you happen to face it. But for 5 mana, you get to shuffle your library, exile the top card, and you can play it until end of turn without paying its mana cost. Now, this is an ability that you have to be a little bit tricky with, because it exiles the top card of your library and it doesn't say shuffle and then reveal the top card of your library. It says exile. So that means that if you use this ability and you reveal a counter spell, you're not going to be able to play said counter spell unless your opponent puts something on the stack, or you've done this in response to a spell. So you want to be a little cautious. Same is true for lands. You can exile lands if you try to do this at the end of your opponent's turn. So I'm not sure that the shuffle is phenomenal, but it is not bad. The fact that you do get to play it without paying its mana cost is pretty nice, but at 5 mana, you're not going to build a deck around this unless he's your commander, in which case you're doing something totally different. But as far as Bray is concerned, I'm not going to be running much that costs more than 5 mana, if anything. So, and there are some definite problems. For example, let's say I use this ability and I reveal Mind Twist. Well, Mind Twist for 0 is not very exciting, and there's no other way for me to play it. So if this just drew the card, it would be a heck of a lot stronger. I'd like it a lot more, but still, the fact that you get that Karn ability and the 1/4 body, and you get a huge amount of mana. So treat this like a Thran Dynamo or a Gilded Lotus that costs 4. And when you look at it that way, this card's really, really good. I mean, think about um, um, tapping a Sensei's Divining Top to add blue to your pool and then putting the blue into the Sensei's Divining Top. Or think about tapping a turn 2 Jitte, turn 3 Sword of Feast and Famine, which is all useless, and then you play Urza, and you can now tap those 2 artifacts for blue blue, cast a counter spell, untap, and suddenly you're in a great position, right? So really good stuff here, not to mention that you'd get that construct as well. You'd have 3 mana in that scenario with just junk, right? With just equipment. So an amazing card that'll probably permanently stay in the Breya deck that doesn't necessarily belong in every control deck, but almost certainly belongs in Breya. So pretty cool stuff. The next card though is I've talked about it before. I'll bring it up again. This is 100% going in every blue deck. You're mad if you don't put it in your blue deck. A Force of Will for negate targets that exiles the card. It doesn't cost you a life. You can only Force of Will on your opponent's turns. You can't use this to push through a combo piece. Like if you're going off trying to win and you have this in your hand, you can't protect your win with it. While they, if they have it, can disrupt your win with it. So I really like that aspect of this card because they actually found a way to make a Force of Will that doesn't help combo, only hurts it. And I think that's fantastic. But this is either way going to be a 4 of in constructed and a 1 of in, well, we only get 1 of them. So it's going to be in every blue deck in Commander forever. So you're not going to have 2 Force of Will effects. Although this has some limitations, for all practical purposes, it's Force of Will. The other thing that's great about it, it's very castable, and the exile effect can be useful. So if you're targeting like Life from the Loam or something, it's going to be great. I've talked about this card before, though. I just wanted to bring up all of the cards in one shot so far of what I've seen. Next, there's this crazy thing, Archmage's Charm, a very reasonable counterspell at 3 mana. So you get to pick one, right? You get a counter target spell at 3, which is um, you're never happy about it, but you're not upset about it. For example, of course, you can play this off like a Gilded Lotus very easily, or in most cases, you can play it on turn 3. You won't be able to stuff Soul Ring mana into it to cheapen it, but still, it's a solid card at counterspell. But speaking of Soul Ring, gain control of target non-land permanent converted mana cost 1 or less. You can actually steal Birds of Paradise, Soul Rings, Mana Crypts, all so many good things. It's a non-land permanent, so that means creature, non-creature, whatever. That's phenomenal, right? Another a counterspell that actually deals with Soul Ring. It's actually in some ways disappointing because that was one of the ways that you punish blue is that they have almost 0 ways to deal with a Soul Ring or a Crypt. This gives them away, so you're gonna have to be cautious about that because much like when Dak Fagan comes down and steals a Soul Ring or a Crypt, quite often the tempo swing in that is a game loss for the person losing the artifact. This is going to generate quite a few wins. It's going to be like lethal on the spot. Um, just, your opponent plays that Soul Ring or whatever, and then you, you counter the and you steal it rather. It's just going to be really insane because you'll go from having 3 mana if you do steal a Soul Ring or a Crypt, you'll untap, play a land, and have 6, and your opponent will go from temporarily having 5 to dropping to 3. So if you do the math, um, assuming it's their third turn as well, and they had a Soul Ring, which would have put them at 5, what's going to happen is they're going to go to 3 and you're at 6. You've doubled their mana. It's just nasty. Meanwhile, target player draws 2 cards ensures that this card is never dead. So, you know, the best mode for this is going to be stealing a Soul Ring or Crypt. The second best mode is actually going to be drawing 2 cards. And then if you have to counter a spell, well, the fact that this can counter a spell gives you so much flexibility that you're just always going to love having this card. But for the most part, if you have defenses in your hand, if this is the last counter in your hand, you might hang on to it. But the rest of the time, you're going to be looking for the chance where you've got other counters in your hand, you've got 3 mana up, your opponent didn't do anything, and then you're going to end step draw 2 cards and just treat it as a slightly cheaper intuition. And that's totally fine. Totally fine. So amazing card though. It's definitely going to be in every mono blue deck, and it's going to be in any blue deck that can support it, and I'm fairly certain Breya can. As far as cards that assist, there's this nice thing. So they've printed the off-color talismans now. So all the so the blue red, the green black, and so on and so forth. Previously, you only had signets. Now you've got talismans. So you can play 1 talisman in each color for Breya. That produces blue. Of course, all 10 color combinations will exist now, but the ones that we care about are the ones that produce blue and something. So the fact that we can throw this into Breya is very nice and may potentially mean that playing a card with triple blue and the cost is a little bit easier. I think that's going to be pretty nifty. I will pop back on this. One thing to keep in mind is that when you use either of the bottom 2 abilities, it's the equivalent value of a cryptic command, counter spell, draw a card, or draw 2 cards, or remove a permanent and gain control of it, all equal to a cryptic command for 1 less mana. It's only when you use the top ability that this thing is a little bit weaker, but it's a discounted price. And Talisman of Creativity will assist in casting it, as will potentially Fiery Islet. So they've added these new, what appear to be off-color pain lands. You don't get the option to tap them for colorless without paying life. You always have to pay a life, but the fact that they cycle from play is going to be really strong. Um, because, first of all, with this, you can get a thing going with Crucible where you just replay it, draw a card, replay it, draw a card over and over. It's costing you a land drop, so it's not a great situation to be in. But if you're at a stall mid-game and you're looking at Crucible and you've got tons of lands because you've had a Crucible out for a while, and you find this thing, all of a sudden, um, it's kind of like it's just another great target for Expedition Map. It's kind of like your opponent's. Well, at that point, they're in a lot of trouble, right? Because you're now drawing 2 cards per turn. You can quickly get ahead. Now, whether or not I can slot this into the mana base for Breya is a question that I don't know the answer to. But if we go ahead and take a look at the deck, so I've got Izzet Signet in here temporarily, so that's placeholdering the Talisman of Creativity. So I now need to stick Urza, Force, Archmage's Charm, and then potentially Fiery Islet in here. So right now I've got Confluence and Misstep holding slots, and that could be, Urza and the Negate. So I need the 3 cost Charm, and and then I would potentially need the land as the other 2 cuts. And as far as where to cut those cards, I actually don't know. So that would be an interesting thought process, I think, if you're looking at trying to improve the deck. It's possible, for example, we just cut the last basic island and just run that new blue-red land. But I'm expecting to see similar lands in blue-black and blue-white. So I'm not sure that that's really like a long term where we're going to be. We'll probably end up running them in some quantity though. And I don't really think that cutting the Cephalid Coliseum when I know Narset's staying makes any sense. So what cuts do make sense? And also, of course, if you cut all the basic lands, then when your opponent Path to Exiles you or uses Ghost Quarter or any of that, then they don't get punished, which is a bit of a bummer as well. So what cuts to make? Unsure. I'm totally unsure. It's possible that I just run the 3 blue cards, Urza, the 2 counter spells, right? And I don't bother with the Signet and I don't bother with the land. That's another option as well. But for now, this is a configuration that I'm running and I'm going to show you some games. So hopefully you get some ideas. I want to get your mind churning and thinking about that before we started so that perhaps as you watch these games, you might offer some suggestions. I think in a couple of these I had, instead of the Signet here, I had one other counter. I think I had Daze at one point, and then I had like Condescend, and then I was just like, you know what? Then I saw the Signet on the list or the Talisman on the list, and I was like, okay, well let's just placeholder it with that, and I stuck with that. So if you see a Daze or something, that's the reason why. So all right, let's take a look at some games. These are just the games that I played today. Obviously, I have my results are not filtered or anything. So I don't know how many games this is. What is this, about 10? Yeah, 10 games. So we'll just run through them and see what happens. So first game's against Noble Ninja. Interesting combo. And we will... this player's playing Geist of St. Traff. I have to take a mulligan. I decided to put the workshop that I saw on top of my library to see if my opponent's draw was fast or slow. If it's a slow draw, then I'm going to do this. And it looks slow to me, so I'm going this route. If it was a fast draw, I was going to shuffle it away, possibly even Mystical Tutor, and try to respond in some way. All right. Well, my opponent's draw just got a lot faster with that Sapphire Medallion. So end step, I'm going to go ahead and Mystical Tutor here for Mana Drain. So of course my opponent knows I have a Mana Drain. But I can replay that Bloodstained Mire, and I can now, this is what we want, right? So I want the game to play out nice and slowly, in which my opponent has to play around a mana drain while I continue to use a Crucible of Worlds. Opponent does not play around a mana drain here, runs out Geist. So fair enough. So we'll see if we can make that punish that play here. All right, there's my one basic island. So it would certainly be better as the land that sacrifices. I'm going to run out Jace, though, and I'm going to put it back here, get a Chromatic Lantern in play, shuffle away those cards that I don't want, run out at the ready, and plus up so that I can prepare to kill their Sapphire Medallion. If they play their Geist, well, that's okay too, because, of course I can play my commander here. So, all right, so I'm going to go ahead and Jace up and kill the Sapphire Medallion before I make any plays, kill the island before I make any plays. I'm doing this all pre-combat, so if my opponent floated some mana, let's say they had a card like Thirst for Knowledge, it costs blue, white, and one, then they would have had to play it in response to the Sapphire Medallion. If they have a card like Condescend or Power Sink or whatever, um, they the order I played in was to ensure that I didn't have to mess with any of that. And opponent didn't even float mana, so I didn't have to declare an attack step. And I'm prepping to start casting my commander. And excuse me. At this point, my opponent just gives up. So fair enough, and we move into game two. Also against Noble Ninja. I don't remember. I think some people may have played and dropped or something. I'm not sure. We'll see if this is the case. All right, so he's playing Ghoul Caller Giza and gets to lead off with a Skull Clamp. Excuse me, and I have a fairly slow hand, but I do get to ponder to pick it up a little bit with that Ancient Tomb. When it then runs out of Wayfarer's Bauble. So I'm going to Tomb into Grim into top and pass. Opponent baubles another land into play. And things are looking pretty good here. Not phenomenal, but solid. I run out of Edelkin Shackles here, and strangely my opponent concedes. So I'm not really sure what that was about. I mean, I was planning to Sensei's Divining Top and look for some land, and then I impulse passed if I didn't find any. Sorry for the yawns. The idea was, what I'd really like to do is get another blue and then impulse, do something like over the course of the next couple of turns, impulse, snap, impulse. But I played the Shackles here just for mana efficiency, and so it's kind of weird to me when my opponent conceded, but fair enough. I did have a ton of mana, so I look 74 here, and I don't know what their deck was trying to do, but maybe it's trying to pinch my mana. And they're playing Amara, Soul of the Accord, and I took a mulligan because I'm concerned. Well, my hands didn't have, they had everything needed except for the mana, and then I had no mana and nothing I needed. So, and now my opponent, so they've got this thing going where every time it turn sideways. They get a 1-1. I remember this game was pretty epic, so hopefully we don't bug out here. So I'm going to run out Talisman here, still sitting on Counterspell because it's already a bad situation. I don't want it to go from bad to worse. Opponent punches in for 3 there, tries a Knight of Autumn, which would most likely kill my Talisman, so there's the counter. So I was thinking I might like to get the Thran Dynamo down here, but probably need to stand on a Mystic Confluence. And my opponent does nothing here. Plays a Springleaf Drum and nothing else. They've got a Crow's and Verge they can use. So I'm going to just draw 3 cards there, which is pretty nice. Run out a Dynamo into a Trinket. And then use the Trinket to play a Skull Clamp. I'm going to go ahead and get red here so that I can get Breya going soon. My opponent, with the Skull Clamp attempting to be clamped, plays Sylvan Reclamation. So an instant with basic land cycling. It's totally gross. This card should be in every green-white deck, 100%, no question. And I was not prepared for it. But it's exile 2 target artifacts or enchantments or any combination of the 2, up to 2. So they were able to exile my Clamp and my Dynamo, which is really bad for me, at the end of my turn, too. Doubly bad. Opponent then play a Crusade. So whenever a creature comes into their control, they get to put a +1/+1 on each. And you can see here I've got this lousy Daze in my hand. Be real nice if that had been an extra Signet. It now has a Dust Bowl, so this is getting real tough. And then plays the landing chords for 8. If they hadn't played the land first, I could have dazed this, but they did, so which was strange, considering that they're going to get an Avenger. You'd think that they would Avenger not play the land first, at which point I would daze it. When they tapped the Amara for the Convoke effect, they convoked with all their cards and put a triggered ability to create a token on the stack. But then if they hadn't played the planes, if they had tapped all this to cast the giant chord without playing the planes, then the triggered ability to produce the soldier would have been on the stack, as would the chord, and I could have dazed it, again, if they hadn't played the planes. Because as long as I didn't let the Amara resolve to give them a soldier that they could then use Springleaf Drum with, they wouldn't have been able to pay the extra 1 if they hadn't played the planes, if they had held it for the Avenger. But because they played the planes ahead of the Avenger, which is extremely strange, I guess my opponent had a read on Daze, which is weird. I wasn't able to daze it there. Again, I don't think Daze really belongs in this deck, but it was a tough spot. So anyway, here, because I have a Grim Monolith, I'm able to kill the Avenger, and I have to kill it because clearly if all those creatures get +1/+1, I'm totally doomed. But I am taking a lot of damage, a lot of damage. And my opponent has Yavimaya Hollow, so they can regenerate their commanders. They can't even block it for tempo. And I figure my opponent's going to attack my red mana, which they do. I find an Imperial Seal with Dark Confidant, so I can now seal top and get the card I want, which is Mizoa's Jitte, as it turns out. I decide that's better than a board clear here because it allows me to continue to use Confidant. And even though I'm at 8 life, if I can use the life, if I can gain some life back, then I'll be okay. So I go ahead and just kill their commander right away. Before they can untap with it and make additional tokens, but this may have been a mite bit foolish. Opponent then sends 5 1/1s at me. I'm going to have to let it through. And of course, I'm going to take 1 from top being on top, and I'm going to take 1 right here as I force away with that Daze. I finally found a use for it. Opponent misses playing their commander, though, so it turns out that I actually saved myself some damage by killing it. All right, so I find a Bloodstained Mire, which gives me life, which allows me to fetch my commander and put it into play, as well as a Sensei's Divining Top. And then on that turn, my opponent draws and looks at the board. I have an active Jitte, I'm at 2, but I have Breya in play and 2 tokens, plus I have a Sensei's Divining Top for Dark Confidant. And my opponent thinks and then decides they've had enough and they give up. So managed to win a totally epic game where I had to use Jitte in order to in order to sack a land, or I would have been dead. So kind of an awesome game, I thought. So then I have a few games here against Cryantic, so hopefully you enjoyed that one. because I know that felt really good to win. And this opponent's playing Oloro, and you can see I have the mental misstep in here. So I go ahead and just run out turn 1 Sensei's Divining Top, and then top deck Soul Ring from my opponent gets misstepped. That's yummy. This is exactly when mental misstep is crazy good, right? Is exactly for that card specifically. Although with the new counterspell, I would have been able to just mana drain their play here and then follow up by going blue, 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 steal it. So that would have been just fine as well. Anyway, my opponent's not making plays, so I'm going to play a little draw go with them. I've got Snapcaster Misstep if I want it, as well as Cryptic Mana Drain up. All right, so I'm going to take a peek here. Because I can continue to produce mana, I'll go ahead and not shuffle. Get that Mana Vault, and then after combat, I'm going to go ahead and try and rush into a Dynamo. And it sticks, which is phenomenal. Opponent runs out Anticipate. A card that I didn't... never mind, I won't say it. Anyway, I untap Mana Vault and play a Sensei's Divining Top and pass, still sitting on Mana Drain, as well as Mystical Tutor. Of course, if you've watched the channel enough, you certainly know what it is that I'm trying to set up with Mystical Tutor. There's a land drop for me, so I'm not ready to pull the trigger just yet. We'll see what my opponent vamped for. If it's a land, I can't do anything about it, but just about anything else then I can. Opponent DTs. Goes for Crypt, and I think about it and decide, yeah, that's fine. Go ahead and keep the Crypt. All right, end step, I'm going to take a peek. There's a Demonic Tutor of my own. I don't actually want it. I'm going to look again. All right, there's a Remand. I do want that. So I'm going to attempt a Mystical Tutor, and my opponent has an Arcane Denial. So I use Sensei's Divining Top and then remand the Mystical Tutor into my hand. I had exactly one floating from the Thran Dynamo, and then attempt a Mystical Tutor again. So I get the top back because I remanded. Tutor resolves, and now I have a Mind Twist. After combat, I'm going to go for the big twist with one floating. Opponent has a Cyclonic Rift they play, and then in response to that, I'm going to counter it and bounce their Mana Crypt and follow up with the Sensei's Divining Top. And at this point, my Oloro opponent decides that them having 5 lands and nothing against me having what I've got, plus 3 cards in hand, plus a Sensei's Divining Top in play, a little much, and they decide to pack it in. And certainly right for them. I mean, they don't have triple black, so there's no way for them to top deck a Necro to get out of this. So really the best, I guess the best they could do would probably be a Time Twister, but who runs Time Twister, really? All right, so after Cryantic, we end up playing a second game against the same deck, actually, against the Laurel. And I've got this draw here. My opponent wanted to test their deck, I guess, against another control deck, and so here we are. Another Sensei's Divining Top start was really, really good for me, obviously, because in the blue-on-blue match, especially the slower ones that these tend to be, that is just very powerful. Because I have a Shuffle effect and Enlightened Tutor, and because I want to make this play here, I actually don't peek with top. I just go straight for a turn 2 Breya. And because what I want to do is I want to pressure my opponent right away and then use Sensei's Divining Top to find cards that will refill my hand. Meanwhile, I can attack my opponent's mana. It's almost a Time Walk right there, which deals 6 damage to my opponent. And with Sensei's Divining Top, I can now get a Crucible of Worlds. This is one of the rare times when I down one a Soul Ring early in the game. This is still the early game, believe it or not. But I am going to go ahead and shuffle and take a peek. See a Vampiric Tutor, so I'll put that on top and send in. If my opponent makes a play, like taps out, I can tap the top and then Vampiric Tutor at the end of their turn and Mind Twist them and just administer the death blow on the spot. If they don't, then I'll continue to use the combination of Crucible and Fetch Lands and Sensei's Divining Top to build up the perfect top of my library. So I go ahead and set up a Brainstorm on top. So now I can Vampiric into a Brainstorm. I could have Vampiric into a Mana Drain before, but this is just that much better. All right, so my opponent goes for a Doomsday here, and I look and I'm like, let me make sure that I'm reading this right. You have actually you've actually reduced your clock by an entire turn and killed yourself. Like, this is a dead on board play. I'm certainly not going to fight with that, but just in case they've got something that I can't, I don't know, Hercule's Recall or something, I look at the top, I see a muddle, so I'm going to brainstorm into it. Opponent tries to muddle my brainstorm, and I'm fine with that. I'll take a muddle, and then I'm going to give him Vampiric Tutor and go get a Mana Drain and just a smash for the kill. And when nothing happens, I just throw some guys at my opponent and they're dead. Cute Doomsday Pile, but black, 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 deal 9 to yourself, discard a card is not a good card when you're getting your face kicked in like that by a Breya. So, but a turn 2 Breya, to be fair, is insanely fast. All right, so I've got this game here against Necro Chains and a very serviceable hand. Necro Chains is running Angus Mackenzie. Um, and my start is a little clunky, but with the Vampiric Tutor, I can fix all that. So we'll go ahead and uh, run out the Vamp. And I'm not worried about wasting a fetch land, even though I get a Soul Ring here. This is a mistake. I should have got a Crypt. I didn't add it up correctly. So if I'd have got a Crypt, I'd have one more mana floating here. Replay the Misty Rainforest and then play Dark Confidant. So, oops, that was a bit of a mistake. However, Necro Chains looks at the board and feels that he's got no hope of winning this game, so we end up with neither hope nor chains over there and move into the next game against Saturn Flowers. Um, and I remember there's a few more really solid games. I don't know if this is one of them. Kalia the Vast. I remember this game was acceptable. I had a, a clunky hand here, but I go ahead and find myself a Jace. Really what I was looking for was something to deal with an early Kalia, because if my opponent went Soul Ring there, it starts getting really troublesome. If they went Soul Ring into like Signet, I could be in some big trouble. Instead, it's a normal Signet on 2, so that buys me a little bit more time. So now, in fact, I found a Shackles, so I'm going to run out Shackles, and if my opponent deals with the Shackles, it means they're not playing Kalia, and if they play Kalia, that means they haven't dealt with the Shackles. So either way, here it's bad for them unless they've got some acceleration. Instead, they have deceleration in the form of a Rupture Spire. So I go ahead and just play Weathered Wayfarer and sit on active Shackles with an active top as well. Opponent runs out Gideon, Champion of Justice. This thing's interesting. Um, Only a threat if it gets to 15, but it'll get there fairly quickly. I go ahead and find myself a Cryptic and play another fetch land and pass because I'd really like to use the Weathered Wayfarer despite the fact my opponent missed a land drop last turn. And on this turn they play a Rakdos Carnarium, so I fetch in response to the bounce, then activate Weathered Wayfarer in response to the fetches, both fetches, which allows me to go get a strip mine. Then the two fetches come out and they bounce the land, and we're totally not even on lands. But for a split second there, my opponent had 4 lands to my 3, and that's all I needed. I let my opponent hit me with anger because I don't want their Gideon to plus up. It's based on the number of creatures I control, and I steal it after combat. I go ahead and kill the Rakdos Carnarium, Dak Faden, and steal the Signet, and I'm going to smash into Gideon as best as I can just to keep it under control until I get to a point where I can do something about it. Opponent plays a Rupture Spire and thinks about the board state and decides that they don't really have any hope here. And they are 100% correct. They have no hope. There is no likelihood that they're going to get out of this game. What's going to happen, of course, was I'm going to use Sensei's Divining Top to make sure that my next few draws are very good. And Deck Faden is going to clear out any nonsense that I don't want. And then once I get up enough mana, I'll probably end up just cryptic. I may end up just crypticking the Gideon back to hand, or I play Breya and like double shoot it, for example, on a turn where I attack in. So like maybe if I get up to 8 mana, I go attack it to 5, because my opponent's going to plus 1 it, and it actually ends up being plus 3. So it's gonna go to 8, and I hit it back down to 5. We're gonna play that game, and then eventually maybe I play Breya, activate, and deal 6 to it on a turn where it's at 5 after attacking, and then deal with it that way. So either way, not looking good for my opponent. Of course, if I get to 8 mana and I get to go Jace with Cryptic, I might also just let it get close and then counter something and bounce it and reset the clock, and then Jace would ensure that um, I never had to worry about it. Anyway, so the next game is Turbo Bird. I think is really good. So my opponent, Turbo Bird, is an opponent I played before. Always tends to be a challenge. Playing Rowan Kenrith and Will Kenrith. Not a lot to say about these other than the fact that they're 6 mana. And while they have some cool things that they do, they're still really not the best. But it is 2 commanders for the price of 1, and that's pretty good. And watch this start. So the start I have here is very acceptable against a fair draw. My opponent does not have a fair draw. Inventor's Fair, Soul Ring into Thought Vessel into Mana Vault. So I get to go land. My opponent untaps and gains a life and has 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 mana on turn 1. So they're gonna have 8 mana here on turn 2 if the thing didn't come into play tapped. Totally nuts. All right, so what do I do about this? Remember, Vandal Blast is not in the deck right now. Well, I'm gonna go get a Urborg and then Merchant Scroll for Force of Will. All right, so my opponent hopefully doesn't have double red or double blue. Well, they've got double red. Here's the thing though. The Rowan side of their commander package is not really the threat, so I have to let that go. It's the Will Kenrith side that's a threat because it draws cards. This is a threat if it ultimates to some extent, but not horribly. Meanwhile, I want to keep them off Will Kenrith, and I'd really like to slow my opponent down, so I go ahead and just take out their Soul Ring and leave them with their commander. Opponent goes for Sarkhan Fireblood, and I have to Force a Will this thing, I think, because it actually allows them to draw multiple cards, and I'm not cool with that. So on this turn, I go ahead and play Trinket Mage and Mana Crypt into a Stoneforge into a Sword of Feast and Famine. I want to pressure my opponent. I want to try to pressure their Planeswalker. I want to force it to ultimate now. And it does. They then clone the ultimate with Rings of Bright Hearts. So what this means is my opponent now has 2 ultimates, which says whenever they activate an ability, it's not a mana ability, copy it and choose new target. So if they activate a fetch land, they get 2 extra fetch lands plus the Rings of Bright Hearts trigger if they want to use that. So they could, 1 fetch land gets them 4 lands. So while I'm doing a reasonable job of suppressing my opponent's mana, if they find a fetch land, they can get up to 4, and that's pretty much it for that plan. On the other hand, if my opponent has a Wasteland or Strip Mine, they could literally strip mine my entire board. So this is super scary, but it was a risk that I had to take. So we're going to start off with a sword, and then I'm going to preordain into another land drop because I just want to make land drops. I don't need to find card advantage cards when I have a Necro in my hand. I get a Torrential Gearhulk out of hand. I'm going to over Necro here, hoping to find a 2-mana counter spell. So I go a little bit deep, but I can't go too far because I've actually taken some damage. So I just stop at 10 and no 2-mana counterspell. Yuck. I probably should have Mystical Tutor that, but I didn't want to give away the fact that I don't have a 2-mana counter, so I end up discarding and exiling a Toxic Deluge, a Weathered Wayfarer, and some lands that don't matter. Fortunately, my opponent doesn't have a play here, maybe because of the disruption, so I go ahead and Mystical Tutor there. And the card I Mystical Tutor for is Mana Drain. I go ahead and play Mox, and I played the wrong land here. I should have played I played Cavern of Souls when what I should have played was the Volcanic. I actually need more red here than I've got. I'm trying to maximize use of the sword mana. All right, so I'll float some mana. Sack the Throne of the High City. Play a Dark Fade and steal more of their mana. I now have unlimited hand size with Necro, but I don't have any life to work with. So I go ahead and Necro as much as I can, plus I get the extra draw. And I've got this problem where I actually should have stopped at 1 less life because I actually had 2 blue up and a mana drain, but could not have played it if I had wanted to. And then look, my opponent drew a strip mine. So they can strip mine, strip mine, strip mine. Now I did kill the Rings of Brighthearth last turn with the readies, so they can only strip mine triple strip mine here. But for some crazy reason, my opponent allows me to untap. Maybe because I had blue in the Cephalid Coliseum and they figured if they targeted I would use it or something, but that's not like wise. Anyway, they let me untap. Now, with the Cephalid Colosseum also producing black from Urborg and the Taiga, I could have tapped for 2 mana and sacked to gain some life if my opponent had a lightning bolt or something. So I should have been okay. But because they don't, they only have 2 cards in hand, they don't try to bolt me. I don't sack. And the reason is if I try to sack at the end of their turn for mana efficiency and then they bolt me in response, then I just die. So if they're not going to make an attempt to take away my life total, then I'm going to untap. And now I have enough life, I have enough mana to where if I sack to gain life and they bolt me in response, I can sack to gain life and they can bolt me in response again. Uh, well, if they had 2, they would have just killed me last turn. But if they try to do it in response to the first time around, I'll just gain life in response to that. Plus, of course, I have mana drain up now. So I go ahead and dack myself and throw away some fetch lands, and my opponent finally strip mines. A little late here. I'm going to go ahead and tap for a bunch of mana, of course, using the lands that they're targeting. And then use that to play a Thran Dynamo, a Talisman, Factor Fiction, pre-combat, and my opponent takes a look and decides to scoop. Probably the Jitte was what got him. Maybe it was a strip mine. It's hard to say because if I take the strip mine here, I'm going to strip mine that is at Guildgate, and then they're sitting on 2 lands because they just use 1 land to kill 3, but I casually put 4 mana into play this turn and can still play a land drop. So even though 1 land killed 3, I can kill a third of their mana base, and I actually generated mana this turn, so they didn't hurt me at all here. So I'm supposing that that's why my opponent conceded. So even though they had 7 mana on turn 1, I managed to pull out the win there, and I was pretty happy with that. And then we jumped into another game. Maybe it was a fluke. I always like to let people play 2 games against me if I win the first game. They're playing their same deck, and I've got a very slow start, right? Very slow, very fair. Opponent leads off with first turn Soul Ring again, yuck, into a Voltaic Key. So now has 2, 3, 4 mana, 5 mana on turn 2, up to. Instead, Factor Fictions though, and I think about it and decide I think they want mana, so I actually put Counterspell and Saheeli, Sublime Artificer in one pile, and then I put Mountain Island and a Sculpting Seal in the other. I wished, in hindsight, I had put the Sculpting Seal with the other 2 cards and just said, do you want the 2 lands or do you want the business cards? But I split it up the way I split it up, so we'll see what happens. I'm going to go ahead and map at the end of my opponent's turn for a land that works very well when you have a Coalition Relic, which is Workshop. So I can now play for bid. And what that does is it allows me to play potentially long-term multiple Breyas off of Workshop mana. So I'm going to go ahead and forbid with buyback to kill Lotus. Obviously, I know they have the Sculpting Steel, so letting them have the Lotus would be total madness there. So they still got a Sculpting Steel and then a question mark. Opponent generates a ton of mana and plays Mu Yanling. I didn't see, I wasn't sure what the heck this thing does, but it does draw 2 cards, and I was like, well, forget it. I'm just going to forbid with buyback for mana efficiency. I find a Karn and really would like to get that Karn into play, but I feel like Breya makes more sense here because I can pressure their planeswalkers. Opponent then plays Rawl and just scries, and then plays a Contagion Clasp, killing a Thopter, but I'm going to be able to attack Rawl down to just 1 token, and that's a big deal here. And I top deck a Necro, so I'm just going to start Necroing. And right here, I was going to Necro for the fences. I was going to draw like a bunch of cards because I really want to counterspell here. Because I feel like if I have a counterspell and a Necro, there's pretty much no way I can lose this game. So my opponent agrees, and like I was going to go ahead and drop down to 10 and set aside. I had already set aside 2 cards. So I was going to set aside another 15. So it's going to go 17 cards deep and make the perfect hand. At which point, attack roll down to just a 1. And then my opponent's basically toast at that point. So neat games against Turbo Bird though. Super. You're definitely turboing when you're soul ringing early like that. Love it when it's me. Hate it when it's them. But I love the format because that variance is actually super interesting. All right, so finally I have this game against Mad Zombie 27. And Mad Zombie is playing Tajik Blade of the Legion. So basically, this is not a this is not a serious opponent. They lead off with Ghost Quarter for you know what it is what it is. But like I'm still gonna play it and try to win it. It's just um, not expecting a great game here. When I see like basic Blaines, Boros Signet, I'm saying that my opponent knows um, some some of the good cards that they should be playing are the good types of cards and just doesn't hasn't acquired them yet perhaps. Anyway, they've got a Bremaz there, and I cloned their Boros Signet in order to make sure I could hit this Breya play, and then I go ahead and just clamp a Thopter because I want to continue to hit lands for the next couple turns, so I go ahead and just clamp away the Thopters. My opponent can remove Breya, then they can get in with Bremaz and I'll deal with it later, but um, they are not even able to do that. They play Selfish Spirit Grand Abolisher. The Abolisher turns Breya off, um, but that is fine because I have a pretty savage comeback, and I go ahead and swing in this way. Opponent's blocks with Selfless Spirit, which is correct, does not sacrifice Selfless Spirit after blocking, which is incorrect. I text my opponent and explain what they should have done and why. They said that they were concerned that the damage would have carried over, and I told them that doesn't work unless there's trample, and they said thanks. So hopefully that'll help them out. Anyway, opponent plays their commander. Of course, I make a little error here by letting it block, but well, whatever. Move the Jite over. Opponent has like multiple indestructible creatures now. I'm gonna go ahead and kill one of the indestructible creatures, and I could kill the other as well, but I didn't see any need to do it just yet by sacrificing artifacts that I don't necessarily want to sacrifice. Instead, I run out a Tezzeret, Exodus 3, steal their Dork there, send in with the team. Opponent blocks the 9/9 construct with their indestructible guy, which is fine because I hit him with the sword, untap all my mana, clamp their creature, Mox Diamond, Lantern, Necro. I actually have no more equipment in this deck, so I can't actually fetch anything with the Stoneforge, so I'm going to just hold it in my hand and hope that I have a way to deal with that a little bit later. I go ahead and sack a Talisman and the Copy Artifact to kill their Bremaz, and at this point my opponent has no creatures, and I've got an active Necro running along with an active Jete and Sword, so game is clearly super over, but we're just going through the motions and having a bit of fun doing it. Opponent plays a creature whose abilities don't actually matter. I can now attack Betelgeuse Shackles, of course, use Misty. I'm going to go ahead and brainstorm and then ponder away what I don't want or demonic tutor it away. In this case, I believe I DT it away. Yeah. Oh, I Tezzeret it away. Go get a mana crypt. Um, demonic tutor, blah, blah, blah. I'm going to Dak Faden, steal their indestructible giving thing, steal their creature, steal everything that they have. Make giant indestructible guys and a few others and send in for what is that? 31, 37. I guess I could have done 40 something, but enough to kill somebody in one shot back when we started at 40 life. And my opponent definitely was not at 40 life, so drops to negative 13. I don't remove the Jite counters here, and obviously this is not intelligent play, so don't copy this at the end of the game. I was just curious to see how much damage I could push, but I missed the Jite activation, so I didn't even get to do that. But it was fun anyway, and my opponent was a good sport about it. You can see the conversation about I was telling him how to keep the Jite counters off. So cool stuff. Had a lot of fun. Hopefully you enjoyed it. I think the games against Turbo Bird were super, and there was a couple other games in there that were also really good. And so I was excited to make this video. More importantly, though, I think the excitement will come with the next set. Already, we've only seen, I don't know how much we've seen spoiled, and there's still so much more to go. Um, I'm very much looking forward to this next set, and it's very rare that you have so many cards for this deck. Now, there are other cards that people have mentioned from the other set, and there are cards that they want me to try in this deck. I think the Planeswalker that my opponent had, the Sahili. The thing about it is you play that card, and if you don't have cards in your hand, it's the same as a Monastery Mentor problem. It's totally nuts if you get it early and you just go to town just creating tons and tons and tons of tokens and whatnot. But if you don't have it early and you're top decking, it's kind of garbage. At least with like say Narset for example, if I'm mana flooded and I have nothing and I draw Narset, I get to impulse and try to dig my way out of a hole. But that Sahili, um, somebody had mentioned, I don't. Oh well, it's a. Is it the new one? No, it's not new. Let's see if I can bring it up and take a look at it. Yeah, this thing um, turns an artifact into a artifact creature with casting cost equal to like that ability right there is not super great. Um, and it creates 1/1s when I cast other non-creature spells. But if I top deck this thing, so it doesn't dig me cards, it doesn't produce mana, it doesn't address anything on the board. In fact, without another card, it doesn't do anything at all. Of course, it can be crazy if you can do something with like Sensei's Divining Top or whatever, but yeah, that's not really the kind of card that we want to be playing at all. So that's why Sahili's not in there. Um, I'm trying to remember what other suggestions that people had. I know people were looking at from the new set. There's a Cabal Therapist. It's a one black creature. You sack a creature to Cabal Therapy your opponent as a sorcery, and I don't know if you can do it multiple times per turn, but basically it's a living Cabal Therapy that you can keep doing over the course of a game. If you can do it multiple times per turn, I'd have to look at it again. Then it's a little better because you could sack a Breya token and then sack the other token and then sack the therapist. And that way you can kind of like strip out the junk from or the good cards from your opponent's hand, leave them with almost nothing. And that's pretty cool. But a lot of times, like it's not amazing because again it's a very very weak top deck. If you don't, you need to like run Gitoxian Probe with it and then hope that you get the two things together, or run like a Thoughtseize will just generally be better on turn one. You'd rather just Thoughtseize, and I'm not playing Thoughtseize, so um, I honestly don't think the card's super great. A lot of times, like every time like a card looks good and probably is good, you really want to ask yourself like, what happens if I top deck this card? If it's a counter spell, at least things don't get any worse. It doesn't make anything better most of the time, unless it's a counter spell like this, or if it's a counter spell like this. But in most cases, things don't get any worse. They just don't get any better, and that's an acceptable thing. But it's why we don't have a ton of counter spells in here, just raw counters, because they don't get you out of a bad spot. But you do want the most efficient, most effective counters with particularly, obviously, Mana Drain and the old school counter spell, but or really flexible, easy to cast ones. Um, but uh, a lot of these other cards, like if they don't dig you out of the hole that you're in when you draw them, then they're not good. Like the deck always wants to be playing every card you draw. You want it to be a card that fixes a problem or helps you find cards that fix a problem or produce mana or cards. Well, cards fixes problems. Mana fixes a lot of problems. So like you really want everything. It should give you mana or cards basically, or be removal. If it's not doing one of those three things in general, no matter how like cool it is, if and then you fill in the blank. If this were to happen and I did this thing, then oh, it would be so great. But if it's not producing mana or cards, in general, it doesn't make the cut. And it's exactly why I took Notion Thief right back out. As much as I love the idea of playing it, and as cool as it is, Notion Thief on its own doesn't produce mana and it doesn't produce cards. And that's not really where we want to be. Like this disruption that does the same Notion Thief effect produces cards, and that's why it stays in the deck. Um, or you have to potentially be able to just kill something outright with it. Notion Thief theoretically can kill a card drawing effect, like if your opponent has a Jason play or something, but um, it's not. it's not like, I mean, it's not a Vindicate, right? It's not a disenchant. It's not like going to kill something that's there causing a problem. It's killing something. Maybe sometimes your opponent has a card. They activate Sensei's Divining Top, and then you flash out in response and stuff, and that's just not that great. So that's why it's gone. Um, so anyway, when you look at Cabal, the Cabal Therapist, what is it killing? Well, maybe it's going to take a card out of their hand, but only under certain circumstances where you have other things going, like maybe you cryptic command something and then you play the Therapist and then you sack and then you like that's a lot of work to make a card good. You really just want your cards to be very efficient at what they do, very consistent at what they do, and you want them to have an impact right away, not in a few turns. And so if you're evaluating cards from the new set, really that's what you want to be looking at. So if there's any cards forgot to mention that were brought up in the comments, I do apologize. I'll try to hit them on the next go around. Go ahead and bring them up again if you would. If you feel like I've missed something, definitely. And if you see anything in the new set that you want me to talk about, let me know and I'll try to bring that up as well. Until then, thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Probably won't be another one for another week. Um, and hopefully everybody had a great Memorial Day weekend. All right, thank you. I'll see you next time.